Hi everyone, Jam here. So today we're going to go over everything that I think you should have in your sewing box. Different tools and why I chose them and why maybe I wish I had them in the beginning. My bird is talking in the background, don't mind her. She just wants to join it. She's been quiet up until I start talking. Anyway. So if you're new to sewing, go ahead and like and subscribe, or if you just want to learn new techniques, do that too. And let's go ahead and get started. So in no particular order, these are the things you should probably find in your box, or it should find its way into your sewing box. First off is bobbin and bobbin storage. So you can see, obviously, bobbins are important. Especially if you don't want to go around switching the colors all the time, it's good to have a bunch of different bobbins. This is only like the bobbins I have in circulation. I have a bunch of other ones as well. So do not skimp out on bobbins. And make sure the bobbins you're getting are the right size. There are different sizes. The most common is this size 15 for home machines. It has a certain height to it, which makes a difference. I accidentally got these ones right here. And these are much smaller. So you're looking for class 15 bobbins for the most part, but double check with your manual. Next, I've got a jar. This is just a pasta sauce jar. This is for my thread management. When I first started sewing, I just found myself with a bunch of threads and it was just causing a huge mess. So in order to save time, got this guy. Makes a huge difference. So it just so happens that my bobbin storage is able to pop on top of here, so that's great. Alright, next, rulers. You know, this is just something that you find in a kid's box, but really you get it from the dollar store, whatever. A ruler is handy because sometimes you just need to measure random things, and here you go. It does, you know, just serve that generic measuring purpose, but there are other ones out there that have other things. So speaking of measuring, I'll move on to over here. Got my measuring tape. Nice thing about the measuring tape is it's flexible, so it can go around people, it can go around curves, and measure whatever it is. Something to keep in mind for your tape is generally when doing garments, you want 60-inch measuring tape. There are 120-inch ones out there, but I found that they kind of get unwieldy. So try to just stick to that 60-inch for the most part, unless you expect to make lots of big projects all the time. Next, this little metal bit right here is a huge lifesaver because it helps preserve that end and make sure that it is good. It has the nice flat end. It's not going to destroy the edge and then mess up your measuring, especially when you're trying to do smaller, precise things. Additionally, when you're storing it, you do want to kind of fold up the inside. The inside of it is the very end of my numbers, and the outside of the roll is the very beginning of my numbers, because I use this part the most, so that way it's easier just measure, alright, keep going, and when it's stored with these folds in on itself, it will crease, and then it can distort your measurements. So try to keep it not folded, especially at the beginning, because that's the part that gets the most use. Another measuring is the sewing gauge. It is metal and it has a little plastic bit here that slides up and down. We'll go over more of its uses later, but it is important for your hems. It's important for folding over, and it's safe to use with the iron, which is very helpful because this can get hot and not actually damage anything. So moving on from measurements, a few things to keep an eye out for. Machine oil, alright, it might have come with your machine, but if not, go ahead and head to your local sewing store and you can definitely get some machine oil. Then these are little tube turners. I do not remember what they're actually called, but I call them tube turners. So I can flip tubes right side out, or I can even go ahead and like thread elastic or string or whatever through here and then put it through the casing of something, and I didn't have to worry about like feeding it through super manually. These make it super easy. So, and they didn't cost too much. I wish I had bought them way sooner than I did, so I did want to add that to this set. Another thing that makes life easier is the thread net. right here. So you may have noticed that your machine came with a few. The point of the thread net is sometimes you have spools of thread that the threads just fall right down the spool, and then you just have this mat of threads at the bottom. You're like, ugh, and it affects how it feeds into the machine. So this is to help contain the threads that want to just fall off. So what you'll do is you'll go ahead and have your spool, whatever it might be. These spools are usually pretty good about not falling off too much. But I can put it around the spool here and it contains all the threads. And then if I have that tail, wherever it might be, right here, all right, when I have that tail, it will slide right off and it's nice and easy to work with. So thread nets, you don't need a lot of them. One usually does because you're only working with one spool at a time. Definitely something to have in your toolbox, and they're like mega cheap. Another important thing to have is spare needles. All right, your machine probably came with a couple of spare needles. Take a look at the container of it or take a look at your manual to see what you're looking at. So these bits at the top here, these little bits at the top here, they indicate what size and type of needle you have, or type of needle, and then right here indicates the size. And we'll do a whole video on needles later, but go ahead and do your best to duplicate it. I like the Oregon brand. Usually it's the most lucrative, well, not the most cost saving, and they're pretty high quality needles, and they're usually the brand that comes with your machine. So Oregon needles, definitely my favorite. I mean, I got this set of 10 for only $6 versus other places I have found them for like $5 for 4 needles. You're like, that's ridiculous. So, and I go through needles all the time. We'll go about the care on that later. Another thing is unique stitch. It's also called liquid stitch, sewing in a tube. Cool. Sometimes your scissors or your seam ripper gets away from you and you do a little extra nick in the fabric and you don't want it to fray anymore, so you can use unique stitch or liquid stitch. You can also use it to reinforce buttonholes or grommet holes or eyelets, that sort of thing. And it helps just reinforce that. Test it on your fabric first though, because sometimes it does leave a residue behind, but it's great in a bind if you need it. Another great tool, seam ripper, mentioned that before. I have like 10 throughout my sewing room. I'm going to break down the seam ripper for you, sorry. So you'll see here we have the ball of it. That little ball makes sure that you only have one area that's pointy, because if that ball is not there, then you have 2 pointy areas and then you have 2 pointy things to keep track of. And then in the groove there, that's the sharp part that will actually do the thread cutting, and thread seam rippers do need to be replaced regularly because that will go dull and then you'll find yourself damaging more things than you're helping. And then of course we have that pokey part. That's a technical term, not really. The thing to look out for is to make sure it's nice and straight, because sometimes if you drop it on the floor, that little pointy part will land on the ground and bend, and then you'll find yourself being mad at yourself for having to work with a bent seam ripper. Another huge part of sewing is marking, because we can measure all the different things, but we need to mark the things as well. So maybe we have darts, or we have notches, we have ruffles, whatever, buttonholes. We need to mark our fabric all the time. There are different ways to mark your fabrics. So I've included a few of the options. I kind of wish I had one more, but it's in my other sewing box in another location. First is one of my personal favorites is the chalk wheel, and you might be able to see it. Yep, there's that little yellow line there, and it is just chalk powder, so I can brush it away and it's just fine. And it shows up on most fabrics. The thing about the yellow in particular is sometimes it takes a little bit more to wash off, because it's either a brush off or a wash off type. Then we also have another option here. This one is my ultimate marking pencil, and it's really great except if you want to use it on white. So I wish I had another color of this, but this is an iron off piece, so it goes away by heat. There's also this other pen called a friction pen. Some people kind of just use it in everyday life because it's a ballpoint pen that already erases. You can use it here as well to do your markings because you can just iron away the markings. Then I have the normal ballpoint pen because sometimes it doesn't matter about your markings having to not be seen later. Having the pen in general, just great because you're not wasting your money on the things that cost more. Pen costs like nothing. Well, that one, no, and G2s are always nice, but pens in general are less expensive. This one right here, also one of my favorites, is the Mark Be Gone. This one will wash away. So all I have to do is dab it with a wet sponge or towel, and then it'll just wash away. It's great. These are all things you want to keep in mind when you know when you're preparing your garment, whether you want to get it wet later, whether you are okay with just ironing it, especially if you plan on, because I kind of kicked myself once, I made all these markings with my iron-off pencils, and then, ooh, bad things happened. I did some of the markings, then I was like, oh, I need to iron this, and then I ironed away all of the markings. So something to keep in mind when you're choosing what marking tool you're going to use. Another thing I have is the, oh, and also having a sharpener for it is pretty good too. Of course, we can't go wrong with more needles. There are two different generic packages. This one is pretty common. So let me tell you how to open it, because I totally knew how to open it. The first time I saw it, I thought this just popped right off. Well, I was wrong and I broke it. Maybe. This actually has like a little hole slot in the side, and you turn it to access all the little needle channels. And then you can go ahead and get a needle out, and then turn that opening to a closed position, and nothing else is going to fall out. This works well for traveling because in general it's pretty self-contained. So, and it's a smaller area. I like the assorted needles in the paper packaging a little bit better because I have more of a variety. I can get longer needles, heavier duty needles, and I like the way they're stored in the plastic like this. So, because I've gone through a few different ones, they'll last a while too. Like, I think this set is probably almost 10 years old, and it does pretty well for me. I hardly hand sew though if I can get away with it. So, I'm sure everybody has their own preferences for needles, but having the nice size differences does make a difference on each of your products. If you're working with silks or satins or chiffons versus something like denim or canvas, yeah, you want different types of needles for those. Next, I've got cutting. There's lots of different cutting options, and they all serve a different purpose. So next, I have the rotary cutter, which is my personal favorite. Anytime I'm cutting something that's on a flat surface, I use the cutting mat here, because I want to protect my table and my project and all that jazz. So I just use the cutting mat, and it has measuring on it, which is super handy. So the rotary cutter, this one's a 45 millimeter, and all I have to do is retract that blade cutter and it'll cut, and it's super awesome. But I push it down, and now my blade's exposed, and then now the blade's covered. So anytime I'm not using it, I do have that cover extended as to not damage anything. Fabric only. It's not used to cut over pins. Nope, not that I've done that. It's not used to cut over thick plastic. Not that I've done that. It is definitely meant for fabric. You can even use it on paper, but make sure it's a nice consistent texture so that way it cuts evenly. You'll find that the blade is what you'll need to replace because it turns out that it will dull over time or get nicks by the other ways I talked about. Other cutting options is embroidery scissors. Love these little guys. It's nice sharp tip to it, and I only use them for my crafting, for sometimes paper, but generally only fabric. And it's great for getting into those little corners. Having that nice sharp tip there makes a huge difference. So embroidery scissors. Next, I have my fabric scissors. These are for fabric only. All right, everybody in my house knows that anything they want to cut, they do not use these scissors under penalty of death or maiming, depending on how upset I am at the time. But they don't use it for paper. They only use it for fabric. It is not used to cut little pieces of plastic. It is not used to open up packaging. It is only for fabric. So other people will put like a little piece of tape or a little ribbon or something to indicate that it is only for fabric. Make sure everyone in the house knows. That way you do have the authority to kill them if they use it. Otherwise, don't kill people. Anyway, these next ones here are little snips. I use them on my thread. I've gone through a few different ones. This one's actually more of an industrial type. The brand, I don't know how to say, SUSEI, has worked out well for me. It usually comes in a couple different colors too. I found mine at my local sewing store. Those are for threads only. I don't go cutting fabric with that. Now, fabric loves to fray. So getting a good pinking shears makes a difference, especially if you don't have a serger yet. This helps give it a nice clean finished edge, and it will prevent fraying. They come in right-handed or left-handed, so keep that in mind when buying them. And if you take care of them, they'll last you a good long time. Couple things left. I have this right here. This is double-sided fusible tape. Sometimes it has a paper backing to it. This one's only a 1/4 inch wide. I found the 1/4 inch is most versatile. There's also 1/2 inch wide or 3/8 inch wide, but this one's a 1/4 inch and it works out really well for me. I use it all the time as like a little cheat. Then you've got pins and your pin cushion. In this case, I have a magnet. A lot of people will have a variety of colors of pins. I have a couple of them mixed in here, but I prefer the yellow. I like yellow because it pretty much stands out on every color, and I don't have to keep looking for a different color when I'm looking for my pins. I can just look for yellow and then I find it. So if I had other pins that had all pink and then I happen to work on pink fabric, well, that's no good. Or like just having that variety of color, it makes a difference to me because I like having that consistency. I know all of these are going to be easily found, especially if I drop them. I can just look for yellow. And this is a magnet, so if I do drop them, I can just absorb it with the magnet. I like these a lot better than my original like classic tomato pin cushion because I had to physically poke each pin in there versus the magnet. I can just throw it on there and it catches and I'm fine and it's good. More of a risk with the magnet though is when you're blindly reaching for the pins, you could get poked, which is just a hazard of the job anyway, so it doesn't really bug me that much. These are all things you should put in your toolbox if they will fit. Speaking of toolbox, I have my toolbox. This is my favorite toolbox because it's clear and I can see all the light, so all the clear helps. Then I've got the ability to see everything all at once, and then I'll throw everything back in there later. But I like my snapware because it's pretty convenient. Now I had this one for a few years now, so the snaps are starting to go out a little bit, but I don't travel with it too much anymore, so it doesn't bug me. Thread is also an important part. Thread and thread storage. I bought this nice little variety pack. It's actually also a sewing box. I don't really use it as that. Oh look, bonus bobbins. This is good for just practicing because sometimes you just need the practice and you don't want to get nice fancy things. Buyer beware though, on variety packs, it's usually lower quality thread. So this thread is more likely to leave a lot of lint behind, to break, and to get tangled into your machine a little bit more because it's not wound quite right. So, I mean, every brand of machine works with different brands of threads, which I'll go over later. Alright, thanks for watching. Join me every week for a new episode on learning how to sew or another crafting technique. Don't mind the bird rustling in the background. And if you like what you see, go ahead and like, subscribe, share, and you can even join me on Patreon, where you'll get extra patterns and extra videos, extra guidance, and it just keeps me running on making this channel. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks! So I realized I forgot a couple of things. Safety pins, important for guiding different things. Ginger wants to say hello. She's just talkative right now. Woohoo! Yep, that's right, Ginger. Then I also have this tailor's chalk, which is super helpful when working on garments because it doesn't rely on gravity. The click wheel usually relies on gravity, and so does this felt tip pen. It's best to actually store it downwards so that way the ink goes to the bottom. And then another piece that I forgot were these two weights right here. I actually have probably about 10 of them. Important when laying my pattern pieces and my fabric flat on the table, and it doesn't... Yeah. She wanted to join in. Alright, so important for laying the pattern pieces flat. As well as the fabric, and you don't want it to fall off the table. Then next thing is, yes, Ginger. She's just mumbling away. Sorry. Alright, so, yes, Ginger? Hi. Hi, yeah. Alright, so... Next thing, yes, you're a good bird, alright, is this tracing wheel. You usually find this in your grandma's mix of sewing supplies, and you're like, why is this a thing? It's only good if it also has tracing paper. Yes, Ginger, you're so funny. It's only good if you have tracing paper. This is great for transferring markings, especially from pattern pieces to your garment. I use this most in garment making, but from time to time I'll use it in quilting or applique as well. So those were the things I forgot, and you know, you get a little bonus with Ginger talking in the background. Alright, thanks. Have a good one. So this is Ginger. Will you say hello? Alright, she's my new secondary character, guys. She's my little partner in crime. Yes, you're a good bird. Now that I'm paying attention to her, she won't talk. Go figure.